One of the things that I've loved about coaching, that I've sort of seen in a lot of my clients, whether it's CEOs, CFOs, young professionals, women, athletes, it doesn't matter across the board. There are things that we are innately, they're our superpower. And they are so innate to us that they're the place that almost causes friction with other people because we can't believe they can't do that. Oh my God, I can't believe so-and-so did. Of course you do that. Well, no, that's your superpower. It's so innate to who you are and how you show up in the world that you don't even know that's where you shine. And so one of the things I love in working with all of my clients is helping them see their superpower and knowing it isn't because other people don't get it, it's because that's where they rock the house. My clients like that I come and address it from a comprehensive perspective, that it's about your physical presence, not just your thought, that it's from the moment you walk in the door as a leader, there are things that you can do and ways that you can show up, that it's your body position, your energy, it's just, there's so much to it. And so most of the people who end up working with me like the fact that it's a very wholehearted, whole-bodied, whole-minded way of stepping into who they are as a leader. It's not just tools. Right. So the way that I love to talk about it is it's when you as a high-performing person move from that space of what you do, from performance, and it's more about who you are. Because as a leader, people are following you, the person. And while there needs to be strategy and planning and a vision and all of that, if they don't believe in you, it doesn't matter what happens with those. And that's one reason why I started getting into coaching, is because we could create the best strategy you wanted. But if you didn't have the right leader, it didn't matter. It just really didn't matter. So people think that leadership is something that's just natural. You should be a great leader. And that's not true. And so to have the ability to stand in it with somebody and learn, and to be able to partner on this journey of becoming the leader that you are, that's where people turn to coaches to say, okay, help me understand what I'm not seeing. Help me understand the stories that I'm bringing. Help me understand what's happening in the context of the industry so that my role as a CEO might be different. So it really is not a tour guide at a museum. I'm not sort of saying, oh, here's this exhibit, learn it, you'll be great. It really is walking into the jungle together and saying, what's here, what can we do, how do I as a coach support you on this magnificent journey that you've decided to take that's really an adventure. So that's when people turn to coaching. I've got a whole bunch of different toolkits that I've learned over time. And it's not like I'm going to say, oh, we're going to use this tool and this tool and this tool. What makes it dynamic and interesting and always new for both me and the client is every situation is going to be different. So I may bring this possibility forward, or I may open this door and say, does this interest you? Or I may offer this resource. You really should read this article. And so it's being able to bring all of this different stuff that I have either learned or experienced or keep finding, because I'm going to keep reading what's out there, and being able to, as a client and I are working together, be able to hold the space for them to explore what they need to, and then bring in from all these different, whether it's about body and somatics or neuroscience with David Rock and the SCARF model, or emotional intelligence in Richard Boyatzis, or Doug Silsby in presence-based coaching. I can bring whatever feels like a good thing to offer. And if it feels resonant to the client, we can then explore playing with that. And if they go, then I can say, okay, well, what about behind this door? Or let's play over here. So that's where the partnership evolves, is because there isn't one right formula. There isn't like a step 1, 2, 3 for every executive. It truly is who that person is, where they are, what they really want to accomplish in the world, and how can I then partner with them to help them get there. And it's something that I think is really important in coaching and in interacting with people, because as a coach, you can hear somebody say, I need this, and you step into solution with them. But you're on a very superficial level, it's activity. So if you pause and you go, well, what's important about that to you? You'll drop down to behavior. And if you pause and you go, well, what's important about that to you? You start to get down into what really matters. So in coaching, one of the most important roles that I think I play is helping people slow down and really get to what's happening underneath those levels of I think of it like a river surface. You have all the sparkling things that are happening in your lives and you're responding to, and you're seeing light or you're seeing butter, it's just all this stuff on the surface. But if you can really connect to what's happening with people below those levels, both for me as a coach or for my clients as leaders, that's where change happens. And that's where you can really start to impact who I am as a coach, who you are as a leader, to even conversations with people at cocktail parties. I mean, it truly is that space of where the quiet is, where the calm is, but where that resonance is.
Who do you coach?
Well, I have three sort of groups that I work with, and one is your classic senior executives, so mostly CFOs, because especially in today's world, you as a CFO, it's not just transactional anymore. You've gotten from somebody who's very much in a risk management, trying to take uncertainty out of everything and create a model that the company can function around. Makes total sense. As you get to be a leader, it's being more comfortable with uncertainty, with higher risk, especially if those CFOs want to become CEOs. Very different relationship with that way of being in the world. Risk, uncertainty, leadership, relational, transactional systems. It's just this really complex, cool place to be able to explore and play and find their path. So one of the neat things about CFOs is they're used to seeing systems. They've had to manage systems. They have a way of seeing the world that is driven by financial interaction dynamics. It's a neat systems view of the world that is very driven in a transactional way. And when you start to work in that level, you aren't just working in a company. You're working in a company that's in a certain stage of its life. And that company is working in an industry that has its own dynamics that are functioning. And the CFO is working with a team that has its own dynamics. So when you start to look at it from a systems perspective and helping them really start to broaden their view of how to use that skill, it opens up a whole different way of understanding their role and their relation to it. So understanding the difference in those dynamics, the difference in how you as a leader need to act or make decisions and stand in your own style then within that, it's really a neat place to play with the CFOs, and they start to see it as exploring and playing and understanding where their way of being in the world is rocking the house for what they need to do at that time and what they need to shift. So there's a way that they start to understand how their presence, how their heart, how their warmth is as much a part of it as what they know. And that starts to be a pretty powerful shift. Then I have a fun group that are 20-plus-year-olds that have been out of college, young professionals, who know that they're not quite in the right place, kind of having that wheel spinning in the Mississippi mud, if you know Joe Pesci in that great movie, My Cousin Vinny, where they know that they're not quite getting the traction, they know they want to have more impact in their life, and they've heard about this passion thing, which feels elusive, about, if you find your passion, then the path will open. And I don't agree with that totally. And so we have this very specific program that we go through. It's got specific exercises, it has some assessments, it's different things that I've pulled together from my work over the last 8 years with executives that really seems to help open a door to what are the strengths, what are the values of the environment that they want to work in, and then what's the space where their strengths can shine for them. So this program started with, I did it with one person just because they were struggling and I cared about the person. And he loved it. And he said, oh my God, you have to do it with my friend. And the friend loved it and said, oh my God, you have to do it with my friend. And over a space of 3 to 5 months, they all went through the program and they called themselves the Marauders. So I did not name the program. The Marauders named themselves. And it's a very defined program that is for young professionals who are trying to figure out, they know that they're not quite there. They know they're not in the right space. They don't know where to go and they don't want to just keep trying something. And because they tend to be incredibly talented, wonderful, amazing people, there's so many things they could do. So you start to get confused about which one do I pick? And I don't want to pick the wrong one. And it's, and I hear all these success stories and I'm not successful and oh my gosh, what, help. And through this program, they've found a clarity in who they are. It's sort of, again, I'm going to go back to the sports analogy of when you're on the sports field, if you're 5'2", you're not a volleyball player. There's some clarity to what you pick. And in the working world, it's not that easy. So to really be able to define your strengths, to know when you walk to the table, this is what you bring, and to know your values of, if I'm going to work with people, this is what's important that we all come to the table around, or to know what lights you up to do. There's suddenly, you're like, oh, I really am excited to try this next, and I'm going to see where that goes, and I can't wait to just go play and explore and be who I want to be in the world in a way that feels so much more grounded and clear and thoughtful, as opposed to, I'm going to try this next because it's here. So it's this really fun program, and each person who's gone through it has gone totally different directions. And they're all fabulous and great, and they're the Marauders. So. And so the third area that I work in is around women athletes and leaders, where I've noticed in the work with the other two that women who have played sports or women who have done, could be any activity, but sports is a really easy analogy because it is so driven by muscle memory in the neural system, that there are a lot of resources that women have that they own that lives in them, that we're not necessarily bringing to our leadership and work the way that it could be. And so if you have played a sport and have practiced a move, it's like anything. You practice a move until it becomes second nature. You actually are building that into a neural pathway. It thickens the outside of the neuron, it builds the dendrites at the end of the neuron. It's almost like you've got little lights that just go, here it is, here's the road, take this one whenever something happens. So before you even think about it, the neuron's fired. And so in sports, we do it so much that there's a whole way of being around that. So an example is if somebody who's been in track, stepping into the blocks. I mean, I can just, even as I say it, I can feel it, even though I wasn't even a track person, but I can get that feeling of your weight, your energy, what you're thinking, how you're trying to stay relaxed. And so for someone who's been in that position, that's something that they can access at any time in their business career if they want to figure out a different way of stepping into a situation. It's a way of being that they own. Another example is one that we talked about. So if one of my clients was this amazing tennis player, and as she stepped into the work world, she had so many people asking her to do different things. She was incredibly capable, and she tried to think her way through it. She made lists, she made matrices, she tried to, what's my vision, what am I good at? And there were so many things that still fit, and she was struggling with, how do I prioritize? How do I make choices? I can see doing things. I can visualize it. I can see trying that. So we put her back on the tennis court in her mind. And it's anytime you play tennis, or if you've been in a competition with somebody else, you know as you're playing them, is it going to be a fun game? Is it going to be a tough game? Is it going to be a boring game? So for her, we had her visualize all of these different projects that she was being asked to do. And as they came on the court, she just viscerally knew if she wanted to play it or not. Within 2 minutes, we'd cleaned out the list. So, and for those things she wasn't sure about, we had some questions, information she needed to go explore to figure out, do I want to play this? So again, it was just something that she naturally had in her as a way of showing up, as a way of being on the court, as a way of being a leader. And when she brought it all together, it was just this really powerful way of standing in herself and being able to make decisions in a different way. So the people that I've worked with, the women athletes that I've worked with, it's more about having the power to impact what they want to impact. It's about having the power to step in with confidence, to know that they've done it once. This isn't rocket science. They've got it. They've got this. One of my favorite stories is I was working just very briefly. It was a corporate project where we were just brought in for a couple hours. And this woman was so frustrated with people, and she kept saying, I had to defend myself. I had to, I had to prove him wrong. And I was like, okay. So we kept thinking it through, and I don't know why, because normally in a short time period, I don't always go there. And I said, well, tell me, did you play a sport? And she goes, yeah. I said, okay, what was it? She said, soccer. Okay, what position did you play? I'm thinking defense. She goes, I was center field. And I was like, oh, okay. So if you were in a game and you walked onto the field feeling like you had to prove yourself, what would happen? She goes, I got run off the field. I was like, yeah. So what did you do? And she goes, well, I owned it. I said, well, how? She goes, well, I just walk out. I just owned it. I said, okay. So picture going into that meeting. Hold this that you just named for me. Well, what would happen when that guy said something? She'd go, I'd ignore him. It's like, yeah, own it. And she was just, oh, I own it. It was like, but I didn't know where that was going to go. I didn't know what position she played. I didn't know what sport she played. But it's there. It's always there. It's always there. You can think about different leaders in the world, and there's some classic push energy, and Jack Welch, Steve Jobs, push energy. You just know if they're coming in a room, you're going to have to stand in it or stand out of the way. So a lot of leaders have a very strong push energy but don't recognize it. And so they might be feeling like they're getting resistance, but it's as much reaction to how they're showing up in the room as it is to what they're saying or what they're trying to accomplish. If I walk up to you, you can almost feel it right now. Yeah, and you want to step out of the way. Well, if I come to you offline, it's going to be a very different experience for you. Well, that's all energy. So it's fascinating to look at how the dynamics work between people in a group. And as a leader, when you're sitting at a table, how do you start to be aware of what's being created, being aware of how you're impacting it, and then being aware of how you want to shift it, how you want to use that in a way that builds toward what you're trying to do as opposed to affects what you're trying to do unintentionally. So a great example of sort of drive energy, of someone who's really moving forward and it impacts how people are addressing them, is a client that I was working with on the trading floor. And he got really strong 360 feedback about that it was very hard to come up with to him during the workday to discuss anything. He'd snap, he'd move forward, he was too quick, they couldn't really talk something through with him, and it was impacting his leadership. People were starting to not want to work with him. And so we tried to talk about how he could be more accessible and sort of from the head, from thought, and he kept countering why what he was doing was important. So with his energy, I'm going to go back to the sports analogy, if that's okay, is he was a lacrosse player. And as you can imagine, I immediately went, oh, I bet you he was attack. I bet you he was on the crease. So when I asked, he said it was defense. I, again, was pretty surprised. And I said, okay, so on the floor, you keep talking about the need to step forward. And he goes, yeah, absolutely. You got to keep moving. You got to keep going forward, or else you're going to be done. They're going to shoot you. They're going to be, at the end of the day, you can imagine the type, that energy. So I asked him what happens if you step forward on the lacrosse field, and he goes, oh, they blow right by me. I said, oh, okay, so what do? He goes, well, you stand square, you ground, you watch what's going on, you gather more information, and then you figure out what to do. So I said, okay, so what you're telling me is on the trading floor, you always have to step forward. And he went, oh. And I said, so on the lacrosse field, you want to pause, breathe, get more information before you move. And he goes, yeah. And I go, and what's your team asking you? And he goes, to pause. So I said, okay, so as we talk about this, how does that feel as an option? He goes, it makes so much more sense. So that's an energy shift where he was all in the forward push, gotta move, and his thoughts were following it. This is what I gotta do. I gotta make decisions. But when he relaxed into the quieter energy of gathering, of bringing something in, of understanding it, it totally shifted his decision-making, the way he communicated, everything. It just opened up so many more possibilities of how he could lead.